Well, let me just start to introduce the program this evening. We're here at the Jacob Edwards Library in Southbridge with author and EMT as well, and I'll just show everyone the book. It's Every Hidden Thing by Ted Flanagan, and Ted has a connection here to Southbridge. He had the distinct
Yes.
importance of being a reporter for the Southbridge Evening News in the late
Mid-90s.
mid-90s.
Yeah.
So it's a while ago, so he has seen some changes in Southbridge, and we are delighted to welcome him back this evening.
Thank
We're going to begin conversation with Ted himself and my colleague Jessie McCarthy, and my name is Margaret Morrissey. So if it's okay, we'll just continue with our conversation. And
Fantastic.
so we're thrilled that you would come tonight and revisit the old stomping ground. And I hope that you'll see some changes while you're here in the community.
Absolutely.
So if you could just kind of tell us why that, you know, an EMT would be writing a book and make the connection to your previous career as a reporter and journalist with the Southbridge News here in the mid-90s.
Sure.
So,
I think with a lot of writers, I had a similar background. I started off as an avid reader. Libraries are incredibly important to me. I grew up in Northborough and spent untold hours and days in the Northborough Public Library. I've done some research in this very library back when I was working for the Evening News. So, I've always been an avid reader, and I come from a family of storytellers. You know, everybody's got a funny story about things. So this idea of communicating, having stories to tell has always been on my heart. And for reasons maybe I can't really explain fully, but I've always thought of myself as a writer. You know, even in elementary school, middle school, I was always writing short stories. I went to college for a few years, unsuccessful years, dropped out, joined the Marine Corps, and throughout that whole time was always had a book in my hand and was always writing. And it just, I really got serious about writing probably, in terms of wanting to publish fiction, probably about 8 years ago, and went to grad school for writing. And this book has its roots in my master's thesis for my MFA program, but I would say probably only 10% of that thesis remains in this book. It's a constant process of revision and whatnot. But overall, I think I've always thought of myself as a writer. I've come from a family that valued books and literature, and I always joke that the English degree is the family business. I have two sons in college, one of whom is an English major. My father was an English major. Half that side of the family were English majors. So it just made sense. I don't have any particular passions other than sort of the written word and telling stories. And I love being a journalist. It's funny, one of the characters in this book, he's not a minor character, but he's a mentor to, one of the main characters is a woman named Lou McCarthy, who was a reporter for a thinly veiled Worcester Telegram that I call the Courier in the book.
Great. So it has local connections. That's really nice.
Yeah, and her mentor in the book is based on my first editor at the Southbridge Evening News, who a lot of folks in town might remember, Joe Cappello.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just a wonderful man. The character in the book is different in a lot of ways, but when I would write this character, I was very definitely thinking of Joe. I learned so much under his tutelage. I've never forgotten a lot of the things he taught me I use today. My favorite quote that he ever told me was, he said, "If your mother says she loves you, check it out." And I've always remembered that and pass that on to colleagues and friends. So Joe is definitely in this book, at least in spirit.
Oh yeah, and he has very long roots in this community, especially around Thanksgiving, and he writing up that whole history of the Thanksgiving.
He was such a kind man, such a decent man. He would go out of his way. As a new reporter, I just got out of the Marine Corps. I just finished up college. I didn't really know a whole lot about reporting. And the former owner of the Evening News, David Cutler, rest his soul, brought me to the Southbridge Evening News. He was a Marine, I was a Marine. He saw something. And but Joe Cappello is the one that really taught me how to be a reporter, especially being a reporter at a community newspaper, a paper with such deep roots and importance in the community. It's different than for a national paper where you could sort of parachute into a story, write it, and disappear. Here, I would see them at the coffee shop. I would see them at the pizza
absolutely.
shop. Yeah. So as I've gotten older, I guess I didn't appreciate at the time the importance of that. I mean, I understood it. It was explained to me, but now as an older guy, like I realize, you know, how important that role really was locally.
Of course. Yeah.
You know, and I think we have this ever increasing local news desert. We miss those things even more. You know, that coverage, that the fact that the local paper was so involved in the community. I think that's something that hopefully I think in time we'll find a substitute for that. Probably something digital, you know, like everything else. But I miss that engagement for sure.
Yeah, well, Southbridge certainly was very fortunate to have a daily newspaper at that time.
Right.
And you certainly learned from the best. I mean, Joe Cappello is also renowned as a photographer. We've hosted an exhibit here of his work, and there are some of his photographs available in the community. And they're just gorgeous. And he was taking it one of those, you got one chance with the shot. It wasn't like you could take multiple, you know, photographs. And so I think he's very well remembered in this community, and so you learn from the best,
Absolutely.
which is wonderful. Yeah. So can you maybe read a little piece from this book, and then we can talk a bit about the book as well?
Sure.
If that would be something that you'd like to do.
Yeah, I thought I'd read a little. It's opening to a chapter, a little in the final third of the book, and it's where a character, Lou McCarthy, who's a longtime crime reporter at the paper, has lost her job, but has this mission for the sort of corrupt mayor of Worcester. Obviously, completely fictional. I mean, I think anybody that's lived in Worcester and understands the politics realizes that the sort of mayor I'm describing in this book really couldn't exist in Worcester, the way the real power structure is set up. So I took liberties fictionalizing broad swaths of the book, and it's actually, I would say the book is an amalgam of 3 places I worked as a paramedic: Worcester, Lawrence, Massachusetts, and New Britain, Connecticut. And so there's bits and pieces of all 3 cities. To me, it was more, Hubert Selby Jr. wrote Last Exit to Brooklyn. He always talked about how when he would be confronted by people from Brooklyn who said, I don't recognize these geographic locales in Brooklyn that you write about, and he would say, well, he made them up, that he was really writing about a spiritual Brooklyn. And I think, to me, the idea, I was more fascinated about the idea of what happens in a dying mill town back, you know, in the, you know, from the mid-90s till, you know, relatively recently. Like, you know, Worcester really struggled. I think anybody who looks at Worcester in 2021 would have to say it's found its footing in a lot of ways. Yeah, and but I mean, I think there's still, you know, issues going on, but really, I was more talking about the loss of, you know, what's it like when a whole city loses its loss of opportunity, and you know, what, and I'm always fascinated by old school, like, machine politics. And so in this book, I placed it in Worcester, but there are definitely parts of it that
It's a universal story.
Exactly.
I mean, same could be said of Southbridge and any of the mill towns, I'm sure.
Right,
You know,
exactly.
So that makes it so appealing.
Okay. So in this chapter, Lou McCarthy, she's sort of at the end of her time as a reporter, and she goes to this Chinese restaurant in Worcester where all the sort of power brokers go to meet and be seen. And she's lamenting this fact that pretty soon, you know, she's always been welcome there as a reporter, that, you know, that they were part of that whole power structure, and pretty soon she's going to be out of it. And so this is just her walking into the restaurant to have a meeting with her handler, this Eamon Conroy, who's a bag man for the mayor, a bad guy. And so I just wanted to get a little flavor of what this restaurant would be like, and her thoughts sort of at the end of being a politically connected sort of member of the power structure. So I'll just start at the beginning of chapter 18.
Thank you.
"2 weeks left. Labor Day on the horizon." Lou marveled. 6 months gone in a blur. Writing those stories about Archer, making that dipshit mayor sound like JFK, taking orders from Conroy, it had become like digging her own grave. And now Lou wanted nothing more than to crawl in and let the undertaker bury her in dirt. And now, with the end so near, Lou headed once again to the dingwah. The first time, Conroy had slid a manila envelope fat with cash across the bar. "First half now," he said, "the rest when you deliver." Most of that money had disappeared to pay Danny's college fees and to buy another beat-up Saab. Lou was meeting Conroy there tonight, status update of sorts. The bar at the Dingwall waited for them, their dark energy camouflaged in a room filled with the sources of the city's real power. The Dinger itself had many charms. A thatched hut ceiling over the dining area, the long bar of dark wood that reflected the tin ceiling tiles above, except in the spots where the water rings never quite scrubbed off. The checkerboard white and black tile floor, the small parquet dance floor that Lou had never seen anyone dance on, a corner jukebox, the Keno machine above the bar, framed with bubbling electric orange liquid lights, a buzzy atmosphere charged with clouds of cheap cologne and the sweet tang of fried lo mein noodles. 2 steps in and Lou saw her patron over at the big table by the window, where the city's power players preened most nights. John O'Toole held court before a throng of strivers. He gave Lou a wave and a smile and returned to his scotch, leaning over first to whisper into the ear of Eamon Conroy, who sat to the mayor's left. Conroy tracked Lou as she crossed the room on her way to the bar. A few more steps toward the lounge and she saw Stoney Forrester. The police chief commiserated with 4 beefy, flush-faced men in their early to late 40s, all in cheap off-the-rack suits she imagined they bought on layaway at Spags. The dinner companions were balding and double-chinned, their noses like red vine road maps perched over gabardine and polyester 2 sizes too small. She made them for cops, maybe chiefs from the outlying suburbs, the ones who liked to come into the city and network with Forrester and his guys, or perhaps local FBI agents banished to this crumbling outpost away from the buzz and aura of crime fighting in Boston. Here the agents' careers died slow deaths as one day melted into the next, running down check kiters and small-time embezzlers, or housewives who finance internet gambling addictions by pilfering from the PTA. So I says to the guy, "Buddy, this can go down one way or another. I don't give a fuck," said the nearest man, taller than the rest, round-chinned and with an extra floridness to his face, his sandy-haired comb-over more overt than the others. "I'm still not giving you back the damn doll." The group erupted into howls. They slapped backs, clapped the table so hard the flatware tinkled first, then crashed like someone rattling a shoebox of broken glass. They rocked their chairs and dabbed with their ties at the tears of laughter on their cheeks. Stoney Forrester remained cross-legged, motionless. He laughed without sound so that it looked to Lou as if mirth pained him. Stoney gave the impression of a man weighing options at all times, panning the mud before him in the hopes of finding flecks of gold. Conversations with the chief always made Lou intensely self-conscious, as if there were some secret she would cop to under the intense gaze of Forrester's gray eyes, or were they blue or green? No matter the color, you couldn't help but notice them. His eyes were not the soft underbelly of his soul. You couldn't divine anything by looking into them. Instead, it was almost like they weren't there, or they were blast doors from a factory furnace, steel and cold and belying nothing behind them. Forrester's physical fitness was legendary. The chief kept a 75-pound dumbbell in his office that he would casually toss from hand to hand while he spoke. It was said Stoney didn't sleep, they just plugged him in at night. Tonight, Lou noted the platter of kung pao chicken in front of him sat uneaten. The chief's eyes followed Lou as she walked. She was certain he nodded at her. She suppressed a twinge of sadness as she surveyed the scene. This was the last time she would come to the Dinger as a member of the small tribe that ran the place, find herself welcomed into the city's communal power source. She wasn't one of those who pulled the levers, but as a reporter, she'd moved the people who did, and her observations meant something to them. Being a daily newspaper reporter in much of America no longer meant what it once had, but here it still carried weight. People here, particularly those in the public sector, still cared what the paper said about them, even as they professed not to give a shit. She didn't know how much longer that would last, but it didn't matter. In a couple weeks, when there was nothing to be gained by knowing Lou McCarthy, she would be as absent from it all as surely as if she'd died. And that's how they would talk about her, too. Gone. A vapor. Someone who'd been here and now is evaporated. Jimmy might put her picture up on the wall behind the bar, but it would be like one of those old daguerreotypes funeral homes once made of the dead posed as the living and appearing only the more deceased for the effort. Lou knew what it was like to be remembered. She'd been around for the toast that nights like this at the Dinger produced, when the crowd got drunk and misty-eyed and everyone slapped each other in the back and raised shot glasses to Fitzy or Jonesy or whomever and tilted their drinks in honor of the departed who, if they were lucky and had played their cards right, if they'd been wise enough at the right times to make the correct zigs and zags over a few decades of work, would be at that very moment sitting in a condo on Marco Island, relaxing in the caress of some soft coastal Florida winds, remembering when.
That's wonderfully apt.
Very
That's
good.
gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
I love the atmosphere that you've created there with your descriptions.
Thank you.
That's really
Thank
very interesting.
Definitely get the visuals.
Yeah.
In
Well,
your
I
head.
hope so.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I try not to go overboard on physical description because I feel like, to me, as a reader, I find it distracting when the writer really digs deep into their descriptions. I think a few important things that you want to say about that description, but the reader's always going to come up with something in their own minds, and it's going to be more appropriate for them than anything I might force on them. So I try to leave physical descriptions to a minimum when possible.
Yeah, well, I think you created the right balance there because I certainly was following along and I had my
I was
own
in that
ideas.
restaurant.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
For sure.
Yeah, because that's a nice cliffhanger the way you left it as well, you know, to see where it was going to go. The story,
Thank you.
know. So this is the book that you have written, and it's about some of the experiences that, you know, you've intertwined some of the experience that you've had. Are there other aspects of the book that you'd like to talk about? You know, what made you kind of come up with this story as opposed to maybe other things that you were considering? Because I know you have quite an active background in other types of writing
Right,
as well,
right.
but this is only one format of the writing that you do. Maybe you could talk about that, please.
Sure. So this book I tried my utmost to. It's not autobiographical. I would say the ambulance calls that are in the book, of all the ones, I was only personally on one in real life. Most of the calls, though, I collect stories from my friends. And you know, actually, if you ever want to hear great stories, go to an ambulance dock at a hospital where there's 2 or 3 crews congregating. You will hear, they're just the best storytellers out there because the job is so ridiculously sublime, and yet that's the sublime things become regular. And so I think part of the way paramedics and EMTs process, and I'm sure the police are the same and firefighters are the same, but the way they process it is through telling stories about it and finding those comic elements. The one story in the book I was on was early in my career, we went to a call at a porno theater in Worcester where the theater owners refused to stop the movie or turn on the lights for a drunk patron who had passed out. And as we were carrying him out of there, he started throwing up all over my partner. I was actually on that call. I remained friends with my partner. You know, I think I wanted to write a novel that addressed some things I was thinking about. You know, power politics, some socioeconomic things I had noticed on the job, without being preachy or didactic.
Yeah.
And so I think EMS is a great lens for seeing sort of the world in its most raw form. In that, I teach paramedicine occasionally, and I'll tell my students that the profession is bizarre because you're welcome into literally every home in every space that people occupy, that they want you to be there because something has gone wrong. And people that you've known for 10 seconds will confess things to you that they would never tell their spouses. And it's an old school awesome, biblical awesome, there's an awesome responsibility in that. And so, but I've met all sorts of people I would not have otherwise met, collected many, many stories, but I almost have lost interest an ambulance call is an ambulance call, but what's interesting to me are the stories that the people bring, of the people that you're bringing to the hospital. And as I've gone on in my career, sometimes I have to remind myself, okay, this person has a really interesting history. We used to bring a guy to the hospital who had been one of Patton's drivers in World War II, and I had at a certain point get beyond being interested and remember, there's also some medical things.
Other things happening.
Yeah. So that has gotten increasingly more difficult. I think at the end of the day, if you're interested in people, and you're interested in the world, and you're interested in observing things, it's an amazing profession. writing actually for me, I said this at a podcast I was a guest on not too long ago. I get to sort of indulge. People who've worked with me will tell you that I always find things interesting that, look, the people that work with an EMS are some of the smartest, brightest, great, awesome people, but they tend to be very pragmatic. And so when I make some observation about, some socioeconomic thing I noticed, they're like, oh, okay, Ted, that's great. Wonderful observation, but let's go get dinner. And so this book, a lot of ways, was I get to hold people hostage and just get things off my chest that I've been thinking about, which is the one thing that ties my work as a journalist with my work as an EMS guy is that I've always felt a little outside of wherever I am. So I feel like, as a paramedic, I'm there, but I'm sort of outside the profession, and I'm always observing things. I think that to me is the number one trait of a writer, and it works for a journalist too as well. But I'm first and foremost an observer. I have that part of me that likes to do things, but I'm really kind of interested in what's going on. What's the situation? What's the story underneath the story? I probably should have been a psychologist. I'm always interested in motivations and why people do the things they do, because
Indeed.
it's hard
Or
to
a
define.
librarian. I mean,
Oh, yeah, I'm sure, right? I mean, being surrounded by books must just be, I'd never get any work done.
but I love the people part of it. I find it very similar to how you talk about, observing the people part of, it's a very people-centered
Mhm.
job.
You
so-
probably have to figure out what do they want, what are their interests, what are they seeking? right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I too observe. I like to observe. So I find your character development very interesting too, because you can really sense that comes from that observation of humanity, if you will.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, no, that's, I mean,
A front
most
row
people
seat at that,
yeah.
where you really, as you say, you have this opportunity to really see people at their most vulnerable and raw, and I'm sure you get to hear lots more.
And they're most truthful.
Yeah.
People tend to lower defenses depending on how severely things have gone downhill. Or what's also interesting to me is the lengths people will go to maintain appearances, even when we're well beyond the point where appearances matter anymore.
Yeah.
And I catalog a lot of stuff in my mind I think about afterward. I'm always cognizant that the first thing is to take care of the person in front of me. But yeah, if you're interested in the human condition, for a writer, I don't think there are very few better professions, I think, than EMS. You see people unfiltered.
Yeah.
And a big swath of people,
Oh, yeah.
like different, like you said, socioeconomic.
I used to, when I worked in
All over.
Lawrence, we worked on a paramedic truck that didn't transport patients. We would drive around and meet up with ambulances that had EMTs on them, to do paramedic stuff. And so we would work in Lawrence, which is one of the most economically distressed cities in the state,
Yeah.
if not New England. And then we would also service towns though like Andover and North Andover that are just on the absolute opposite. So it was nothing to wake up somebody from a drug overdose underneath a bridge in Lawrence, and the next call might be in a multi-million-dollar home in Andover. That was or go to a call on the campus of Phillips Andover. It was where you might be, some world financier's kid has broken their leg playing a sport. The dichotomy and the difference between the people you would see, it really was eye-opening. It's an entree to all sorts of worlds I wouldn't usually experience one or the other.
Yeah.
So if you're for a writer, I don't know of many better professions.
Sounds like though that you have a lot more material to write about, and you could keep another book going very easily in just your experience to date.
Mm-hmm.
So are you planning on another book? Do you have something in mind?
So my next book, I'm about 30,000 words into it. I'm actually delving into historical fiction. So again, this is all something that it's been on my mind for a while. I was in the Marine Corps, and when you go to Parris Island, a bit of a vacation spot in South Carolina, a peninsula of land surrounded by alligator-infested swamps, you learn about this incident that happened in 1956 called the Ribbon Creek incident, in which it ties in. I'm interested in proxy wars and the Cold War, and which I feel like a lot of that is still going on today. But back in the 50s, it was really going on, where Korea had just had a lot of sort of a lot of pain when they draw down the military to a, the Marine Corps especially would have these great fluctuations in size, and they would, they used to be very small, and then they got very big in World War II, then they shrank again, then they got very big during Korea, then they shrank again, and all sorts of problems, both internally and externally. And so in 1956, this drill instructor who had fought at the Chosin Reservoir, who was by all accounts a man of conscience, was actually really liked by his recruits, but he felt like they weren't tough enough. He felt like he needed to do something. And so he one night got 74 of them up and marched them into a creek that I've seen. This creek, it's right, if you go to the rifle range where you learn how to shoot a musket, behind it is this creek. I remember it, and it's called Ribbon Creek. And he marched his platoon into the creek, not realizing that the tide was rushing out, and a lot of the kids, they were 18, 19-year-old, these are kids, to me, my thinking now, were not swim qualified. A lot of them were from either from the Bronx, places like that, or from southern states. A lot of them were just looking for work, for opportunity. They had no other opportunities in life. A bunch of them had already spent several months in a special platoon learning how to read and write. That they showed up at boot camp without any kind of skills. And so when the tide took them out, 6 of them died. Yeah, and it was a horrible incident. And at the time, there was some talk about disbanding the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps was seen as cruel and brutal and unusually, sort of an overly militaristic organization. So when this drowning occurred, from April of '56 until the Andrew Doria sank in late June, this was the #1 news story in America. And there was a very real possibility that it would actually ring the demise of the Marine Corps. And they put this drill instructor on trial, and he had this New York, one of the best attorneys in New York, Zola Berman, who took the case pro bono, and basically didn't get the drill instructor acquitted, but instead of going to jail, he got busted in rank and was essentially acquitted they tried charging him with manslaughter. And during the trial, Chesty Puller, who, to any Marine out there, that is like the most revered figure in the history of the Marine Corps. He was still alive at the time. He came and testified on the drill instructor's behalf, while in private berating the drill instructor for doing something so silly as getting a bunch of his guys killed. But he basically said, our training is difficult, accidents will happen. And so he stayed in the Marine Corps for 3 more years, and then got out on a disability and moved back to the family home, which is about 1/10 of a mile from my house. And for years, I've driven by this big brick colonial and thought about this guy every time I drive by. That how random is it in the universe that I moved into a house, and I didn't know that was his house. I found out by accident a few years after he passed away, unfortunately. And so I think often about this guy, and I remember hearing about the Ribbon Creek incident, and the whole thing really talks a lot about the Cold War, the proxy wars, how the Korean War was really the very first big-scale proxy war. I think it predicted Vietnam and some of the things that went on in the last 21 years of endless war. And so I'm writing a work of historical fiction about the Ribbon Creek incident, but I'm experimenting a little bit. I'm going to use some viewpoints of some of the dead recruits. And some other figures in the story. I found this, I read everything there is to read about it, essentially, and I found this great book, little-known biography of the colonel who originally investigated the incident. And because he went against what the bureaucracy wanted, this incident cost him his career. He was promoted to general and kicked out of the Marine Corps. Wow. And he wrote this tell-all. And what I love about the biography is that he's as hard on himself as he is on anybody else, but he tells it like it is, and so it's a really great peek behind the official mirror of what happened. So that's sort of what I'm working on now, and then I've already got after this one's done, I'm going to return to crime fiction based on a figure in Worcester's history who was also a decorated Marine, but also known as like one of the most honest mobsters in Worcester history. And then we'll see. I don't have much planned beyond these next 2, and then we'll figure out. The problem is
it seems like
that's like a full plate there, right there, and it sounds like you have plenty of material.
Tons. And the thing isn't so much finding out what to write next, it's how to winnow down the ideas you have. What's an idea worth pursuing and what isn't. And I don't have a formal, I think I've come down to this very scientific way where if I just can't stop thinking about it, that's what I'm writing next. I don't think too much about markets and publishing. If I've learned anything, there's very little rhyme or reason as to who gets published and who doesn't, and that the only part of the whole process in my control is to write the best book I can. And I have a wonderful agent, and I know, she's an editing agent as well, so she'll help me when I send her the manuscript eventually, in probably another year. She'll help me take it apart, and it'll have the best chance it can have to getting picked up. But after every book, you're sort of start from unless you're Stephen King or somebody like that, Jodi Picoult, you're sort of starting from scratch, which is both a challenge, but it's exciting. I like that. You don't know. It's a blank slate, which means it could be you could have incredible success or not at all, and I like that challenge. So.
And some freedom too, right? Because there's no real set expectations. You can kind of write what you're passionate about.
Right. I think the big mistake for me in the second novel would be to write something strictly to get published. I see writers do that, and that's why I think second novels sophomore slump, right? I think they're never. I mean, number one, usually the first novel you spent years on. Like this took me 3 years to write. And then so now I'm looking at my second novel. I probably will spend a year to a year and a half on. Maybe, but if it takes me 5, 10, I'll just write. I'll know when it's done. Yeah. But I think there's that temptation. I'm always leery of sophomore novels because I understand, and I'm sympathetic to that I have had to stop myself and say, write, with abandon, because don't let the next novel expectations for that creep into your writing, or you won't write an honest book. And I think that's, to me, an honest book written as well as you can is the best. Gives you the best chance for success, I think.
So what's your process like? Do you
Awful.
write every day, or do you have?
Yeah.
Are you disciplined? Like, how would you describe yourself in your writing process?
So my writing process is a mess, but it works for me. And so I would say that I'm undisciplined in an undisciplined way.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate in that, other than spending time with my family, my wife, my kids, and my dog, the thing that I'm most happy doing is writing. I just love it. I always feel a little sorry for writers that will say, it's sheer agony writing. I've got to write. No, I love it. So I hit the keyboard every day when I can, and days when I can't, because for whatever reason, I always feel a little off. Mm-hmm. I don't have a word count. I give myself a lot of grace. I used to say 1,000 words a day or 2,000 words a day. If I get 500 words a day, that was a productive day for me. As long as I'm doing something, I try to write every day. But I'm easy on myself. If I don't, for whatever reason, that's fine too. I don't outline. I know a lot of people that will really know everything about the book before it's going. But for me, the most joyous part of writing is that act of discovery. So I've been in a lot of wrong ways, and I have probably 1,000 pages of material I've clipped and excised from drafts that maybe I'll get to someday. Maybe I know I can grab stuff from that all the time. So one of my favorite living writers is James Ellroy, and he's famous for, he'll write 700-page door stoppers, but he'll write a 900-page single-spaced outline of every novel, which just blows my mind. Yeah. For me, I've tried outlining, and it just really sucks all the fun and joy out of the writing process. So I know I could be far more productive if I outline. There's no arguing that is a very way to be productive. But that's okay. If it takes me 600 pages of writing to get 200 pages of material, I'm fine with that. That's what makes me happiest. And I also discovered I was having this conversation not too recently. I think I'm a bit of a liar, because what I'll do is I'll write a rough draft, and then I'll take 3x5 cards and write a quick chapter summary and lay them out on the table or my bed, and then I'll start rearranging the structure, and then I'll take cards and write chapters that should go in between. So by the time I'm done, I might have 25 chapters of which 15 are written. So I think technically that's a kind of outline.
I think.
Yeah,
It's just not like what you would think of
I think there's a roadmap.
Yeah.
You know, because even some of the proposed chapters don't happen. But there is a point where I have to apply some form of structure. I never know the ending. This book, I love books that have multiple strands that kind of come together in the end. And so a lot of this book were ideas that popped up in various drafts of the book. And that's fun. That's that creative impulse that kind of gets me up every day. That gets me out of bed. I don't, as a writer, I don't love that absolute mastery and command of every aspect of the draft, because I do think, what was it? Henry James used to get in front of his typewriter every day and say, "I'm listening," and then he would just type. And Robert Olin Butler. I love his craft books and his novels, but he's a big proponent of writing from your subconscious, that most of the real work of writing happens deep in our subconscious brain. And so he actually advocates going into like a kind of fugue state. I don't do that, but I definitely sit for a second and then just kind of try to let my subconscious take over. And there's that active discovery, and I don't think it's characters talking to me. I think it's my subconscious been chewing over things, and it's stuck, because there are definitely things that come out where I'll stop and go, I did not consciously come up with that turn of phrase or that word, but I clearly I did. I don't attribute anything to mystical voices, but I think the subconscious is super powerful, and so if I outlined it, I feel like I would, every time I've tried it, I've just come up with sort of a warmed over version of something someone else has done. Mm-hmm. And so I'm always striving. I don't know that I've succeeded yet, but I'm always striving to find a voice that someone could read a passage and say, "Oh, Ted Flanagan wrote that." That's obviously super hard to do, but I want to give myself freedom to find that somewhere in the writing. So we'll see.
Well, it sounds like as if you're giving yourself the opportunity to do that by not restricting yourself in any traditional formats, which I think is laudable, because it really pushes you to a lot of self-discovery and maybe a lot of pieces of material that you may not be able to use because of the process you use. Yep. But at the same time, you're moving forward and you're providing yourself with lots of written material that you can use maybe later, if not in
that's the hope.
You're currently writing.
Yep, that's the hope.
I think that's really laudable. And so, do you have a certain time of day or a certain place that you have to be? Like, do you have to get into the mode, or does it just happen like, okay, it's you're finished work and you've had dinner and you sit down, or is it really early in the morning you get up and whatever?
My favorite time to write, and it's very hard to get because if I'm working I can't do it, but I love to write from about 10 in the morning till 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So when I have a day off, and that's my most productive time. But really, I have to fit my writing around life. So I think rather than a particular time, I just try, if I have a 30 minutes block of time where I'm not at work, or then the kids don't need to drive somewhere, and it's kind of quiet, I just write, and I can write anywhere. I think early in my MFA program, the writer Craig Childs talked about his best friend is a woman who's, I apologize, I forget her name, but she writes these amazing books on natural history while raising, at the time, 3 little kids, and she was just very much like, if she's got 15 minutes with someone sleeping, she works for 15 minutes. And sometimes the conditions, for most of us living in the real world that aren't, can't write solely as your profession, the conditions are never perfect. And so I try to be ready to write on a moment's notice. I try to find 30-minute blocks here or there. I wrote a lot of this novel actually in the basement of my local library. So that was, yes, fantastic. You can't beat a library. Clean, well-lit, quiet spot. So generally I like writing in the library or in my office in my house, just a quiet little room in the back of the house. I aspire to Larry Brown, the great Southern novelist, built a shed behind his house and wrote some of the best novels of the 20th century in this little 12 by 14 shed behind his house. So I find myself sort of going on Instagram sites on shed offices, and so I think eventually I'll put one behind the house. That's
I think Roald Dahl had one too, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken.
Yep.
It seems like it's a way of focusing, in making yourself focus, especially if there's a hardship of cold or conditions there.
Yep.
You know, that you have much to distract yourself from.
Exactly. That's my dream. A shed. Maybe I'll put a little heat in there or something, but just somewhere I could go. Like, I think it's great when you can separate yourself. But by the same token, I never wanted to do like what Vonnegut would do, right? When he shut the door on his family for days at a time, and I don't want to disappear. So I try to work it into my other life. So it's something I do really early in the morning, or really late at night, or when no one's home. Because that way, I'm a very fast writer. I think that that comes from my journalism days. 500 words. That might take me a half an hour. I can do it in half an hour.
Wow, that is something.
That is real fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one thing I do have, I will say, is I can write quickly. I don't. Thank you to Mrs. Buchanan at Algonquin High School in the 80s. I took a typing class. I took it on a lark, and it is probably, of all the classes I took, it's probably one of the ones that I have used my entire life. And so I can type quickly and think quickly, and so I get a lot of work done in those little bursts of time.
Well, I'm sure there's still, an effort to write a book is not just something, even though you say you might write quickly, there's a lot of thought has gone into your book, and I think that it's going to be something that a lot of our patrons will want to borrow to see how it might, maybe they can recognize some people and some of the scenarios in it, but also just to connect with a writer who is continuing his life as well as being a writer, which I think is very challenging to do, and I admire you for that. And I thank you for coming this evening and for sharing your thoughts on your book, and we look forward to seeing your other, maybe the historical novel, or maybe
I'll have to
your
come
mysteries.
back.
Yes, I think that would be very nice.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a treat. I love libraries. In my own personal life, libraries are one of the most important public institutions I've ever gone to. A lot of my early life was formed in a library, so it's always a thrill to come and speak at a library. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's our great pleasure. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
Thank you.